What happens when the world's most ruthless radio host meets a prince who's burned every bridge behind him? You won't believe what unfolds when Howard Stern decides to pull no punches with Prince Harry. In what started as a promotional appearance, but quickly devolved into an explosive confrontation that had producers scrambling and security on standby. The tension in Studio 69 was thick enough to cut with a knife. And what you're about to witness is the moment when Royal Protocol met New York brutality head-on. Before we get into this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerful personalities collide in the most uncomfortable interview ever broadcast. The atmosphere in Howard Stern's Manhattan studio was already charged with anticipation. Prince Harry had arrived 30 minutes late, his security detail creating a minor commotion in the lobby as they swept the building. Robin Quivers could sense something was off from the moment Harry walked through the studio doors. His jaw set tight and his usual media-trained smile nowhere to be found. The Duke of Sussex looked like a man carrying the weight of 1,000 grievances. And Howard, ever the predator when it came to detecting weakness, immediately picked up on the scent. "So here he is, Prince Harry," Howard began, his voice carrying that familiar edge that longtime listeners knew meant trouble was brewing. The royal who gave up his crown for Hollywood. "How's that working out for you?" Harry shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the leather creaking under his movement. "It's going well, Howard. We're here to talk about my upcoming projects." Hold on," Howard interrupted, leaning forward with that predatory grin that had made celebrities squirm for decades. "I've got to ask you something that's been bothering me. You spend years trashing your family on every platform that'll have you, and now you're surprised they don't want you at Christmas dinner. Help me understand the logic here." The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Harry's media handler, sitting just outside the camera's view, visibly tensed. This wasn't part of the agreed-upon talking points. Robin shot Howard a look that said she knew exactly where this was heading, and it wasn't going to be pretty. That's a very reductive way to frame a complex family situation. Harry replied, his voice carrying the first hint of the steel that was about to emerge. "I've been very careful to speak my truth while still respecting their truth." Howard's laugh was sharp and cutting. "Come on, Harry. You sat on Oprah's couch and basically called your family racist. You wrote a book where you aired every piece of dirty laundry you could think of. And now you're talking about respect. That's rich even for royalty." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Harry's hands, which had been resting casually on the arms of his chair, now gripped them tightly. His security detail, monitoring from the control room, exchanged concerned glances. This was not the softball interview they had been promised. "Howard, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what we're here to discuss," Harry said, his voice taking on that clipped aristocratic tone that emerged when he felt cornered. "My team was very clear about the parameters of this conversation." "Oh, were they?" Howard's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "See, here's the thing, Your Highness. This isn't some puff piece where we talk about your meditation app or whatever wellness nonsense you're peddling this week. This is my show, and when you come into my house, we talk about what I want to talk about. And what I want to talk about is how you've become the most successful professional victim in modern history." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. Robin could see his face flush red, that famous Windsor temper beginning to surface. Fred Norris, manning the sound effects, had his finger hovering over the dump button, sensing that things were about to get very real, very fast. "Professional victim." Harry's voice rose an octave. "Are you serious right now? Do you have any idea what my family put me through? What they put my wife through?" "Oh, here we go," Howard said, settling back in his chair like a man getting comfortable for a long show. "Tell me all about how hard it was being a prince." Tell me about the terrible burden of living in palaces and having your every need catered to while the rest of us were working real jobs. I'm all ears." The sarcasm dripped from every word, and Harry was clearly struggling to maintain his composure. His media training was warring with his natural instincts, and Howard could sense the internal battle playing out across the prince's face. "You don't know what you're talking about," Harry said through gritted teeth. The media attention, the constant scrutiny, the lies they printed about Meghan. The lies. Howard pounced on the word like a cat on a mouse. "Which lies specifically?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your wife got exactly what she wanted. She married a prince, got the title, got the platform. And then when the actual work of being royal got too hard, you both ran off to California to cash in on the victimhood narrative." Harry shot up from his chair so quickly that his microphone stand nearly toppled over. "That's enough. You don't get to talk about my wife like that." "Sit down, Harry," Howard said calmly, not even looking up from his notes. "We're just getting started. You wanted to come on this show to promote your little projects? Well, this is what comes with the territory. You can't spend years playing the victim card and then get upset when someone calls you on it." The prince remained standing, his hands now clenched into fists at his sides. "You have no idea what we've been through. The death threats, the harassment, the way they treated Meghan from day one." "Right. The racism thing again," Howard interrupted. "Tell me something. If your family is so terrible and so racist, why do you keep trying to get back in their good graces? Why do you keep showing up to the big events? If they're such monsters, why not just cut ties completely and move on with your life?" It was a question that cut straight to the heart of Harry's contradiction, and everyone in the studio knew it. The prince's face was now fully flushed, and his composure was hanging by a thread. His security team was clearly getting nervous, with one of them speaking quietly into his earpiece. "Because they're still my family," Harry said, his voice barely controlled. "Despite everything they've done, despite how they've treated us, I still love them. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stay silent about their behavior." "So, let me get this straight," Howard continued, clearly enjoying himself now. "They're racist monsters who drove your wife to contemplate suicide, but you still want to grab dinner with them on Sunday. You trash them in every interview, write a tell-all book exposing their secrets, and then you're surprised when they don't roll out the red carpet for you. That makes perfect sense." The studio fell silent except for the low hum of the equipment. Harry was breathing heavily now, clearly fighting an internal battle between his desire to storm out and his need to salvage something from this disaster of an interview. But Howard wasn't done. He never was when he sensed blood in the water. And right now, Prince Harry was bleeding all over Studio 69. "You know what really gets me about you, Harry?" Howard continued, his voice taking on that dangerous tone that had destroyed countless celebrity careers. "You had everything. Literally everything. Born into the most privileged family on the planet, millions of people would die just to shake your hand. And you threw it all away because your actress's wife didn't like curtsying to your grandmother. Do you realize how that looks to regular people who are struggling to pay their rent?" Harry's jaw was working furiously now, the muscles in his neck standing out like steel cables. "You have absolutely no understanding of what we went through. None. The institution tried to destroy us from the inside out." The institution. Howard's laugh was harsh and mocking. "You mean your family? The same family that gave you millions of dollars, multiple homes, and a platform to do whatever charity work your heart desired. That institution. Tell me, what exactly did they do that was so terrible? Did they make you cut ribbons at hospital openings? Did they force you to wave at crowds who adored you? The horror." Robin shifted uncomfortably in her seat, recognizing the signs of Howard in full predator mode. She'd seen him eviscerate guests before. But there was something particularly brutal about watching him systematically dismantle a member of the royal family in real time. They leaked stories about us to the press. Harry shot back, his voice rising with each word. They used us as scapegoats to protect other members of the family. They stood by and watched while the British tabloids destroyed my wife's reputation. And your response was to run to Netflix and Spotify and make millions telling your side of the story. Howard replied without missing a beat. Funny how that works out, isn't it? You got paid handsomely for your victimhood. Most people who get treated badly by their families don't get $100 million deals out of it. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Harry's security team was now clearly agitated, with two of them moving closer to the studio door. His publicist was frantically making throat-cutting gestures from behind the glass. But Howard was locked onto his target like a heat-seeking missile. That money was never about revenge, Harry said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. It was about financial independence, so they couldn't control us anymore. Financial independence. Howard's voice dripped with incredulity. You were already financially independent. Your father was giving you millions every year. You had trust funds that most people couldn't spend in 10 lifetimes. But that wasn't enough, was it? You wanted Hollywood money. You wanted to be celebrities, not royals. We wanted our freedom. Harry exploded, finally losing the last vestiges of his composure. We wanted to raise our children without them being used as pawns in some sick game of palace politics. Freedom. Howard pounced on the word like a predator sensing weakness. You moved from one fishbowl to another. You went from being scrutinized by the British press to being scrutinized by the American press. The only difference is now you're paying taxes in California instead of having them paid for you in England. Some freedom. The studio fell into a tense silence as Harry struggled to formulate a response. His face was flushed red and small beads of sweat had formed on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. Fred had his hand permanently hovering over the dump button, ready to cut the feed if things got too heated for broadcast. At least here, we can speak our truth without being silenced. Harry finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. Your truth again, Howard said, shaking his head in disgust. You keep using that phrase like it's some kind of magic spell. Let me tell you something about truth, Harry. The truth is that you were born with every advantage a human being could possibly have. And you squandered it because you couldn't handle the responsibility that came with privilege. Responsibility. Harry's voice cracked. You want to talk about responsibility? I served 2 tours in Afghanistan while my family was safe in their palaces. I created the Invictus Games for wounded veterans. I've dedicated my life to service. And you're sitting there acting like I'm some kind of spoiled brat. And all of that was admirable, Howard conceded, his tone softening just enough to make Harry think he might be getting somewhere. But then you married someone who clearly had other plans for your life, and suddenly all that service wasn't enough. Suddenly, you needed to be famous in a different way. The mention of Meghan was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Harry's entire body tensed. For a moment, Robin thought he might actually lunge across the desk at Howard. Leave my wife out of this, Harry said, his voice dangerously low. She has nothing to do with our decision to step back from royal duties. Nothing to do with it? Howard's eyebrows shot up in theatrical surprise. Come on, Harry. We all watched the timeline. You were perfectly happy being a working royal until she came along. Then suddenly the whole family was racist. The institution was toxic. And you needed to escape to Hollywood. Are you really going to sit there and tell me that's just a coincidence? She opened my eyes to things I'd been blind to my whole life, Harry said, his voice shaking with emotion. She helped me see how dysfunctional everything really was. Or maybe, Howard said, leaning forward with that predatory smile, She saw an opportunity to become the most famous woman in the world and convinced you to burn down your entire life to make it happen. Ever consider that possibility? The words hit Harry like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, even though he was still standing, and his face went from red to white in seconds. Even Robin winced at the brutality of the accusation. "You have no right to talk about my wife like that," Harry said, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with venom. "I have every right," Howard shot back. "This is America, remember? Free speech. The thing you came here for? You can't have it both ways. Harry, you can't cash in on your royal drama and then get upset when people ask uncomfortable questions about your motivations." Harry was trembling now, his entire body vibrating with rage and humiliation. His security team was clearly ready to intervene, but they were waiting for his signal. He stood there, caught between defending his wife and salvaging whatever was left of this disastrous interview. "You know what your real problem is, Harry?" Howard continued, sensing his target was on the ropes. "You want to be seen as a victim and a hero at the same time. You want sympathy for leaving your family and admiration for speaking out against them. But you can't have both. You made your choice when you decided to air your dirty laundry in public, and now you have to live with the consequences." The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Harry was breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His media handler was making increasingly frantic gestures from behind the glass. But Howard was clearly just getting warmed up. "The saddest part is," Howard said, his voice taking on an almost mournful tone, "you actually had the chance to be something special. You could have been the people's prince, the one who bridged the gap between the old monarchy and the modern world. Instead, you chose to become a professional complainer, living off your family trauma. And for what? A mansion in Montecito and a Netflix deal?" Something in Harry finally snapped. The last thread of his composure, already stretched thin, broke completely. "You know what, Howard?" Harry's voice was no longer controlled or media-trained. It was raw, primal, and filled with years of pent-up rage. "You sit here in your little studio, hiding behind your—" Harry leaned into the microphone. "You sit behind that mic, making millions by tearing people down, and you think that gives you the right to judge my life? You're nothing but a shock jock who peaked 30 years ago, and now you're desperately trying to stay relevant by attacking anyone who walks through that door." The studio erupted into chaos. Howard's eyes widened in genuine surprise. In all his years of pushing celebrities to their breaking point, few had ever fired back at him with such vicious precision. Robin's mouth fell open, and Fred's hand moved instinctively toward the emergency broadcast controls. "Oh, now we're getting somewhere," Howard said. "Oh." But there was a new edge to his voice. Harry had clearly struck a nerve. "So when someone calls you on your bullshit, you attack their career." "Very royal of you, Your Highness. Royal." Harry laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You want to talk about royal? Let me tell you something about Royal Howard. Royal is watching your mother die in a car crash when you're 12 years old, because she was being chased by photographers who wanted to make money off her misery. Royal is walking behind her coffin while millions of people watch and having to pretend you're not falling apart inside. Royal is having every mistake you've ever made splashed across tabloid headlines for the entertainment of people who have never faced a real challenge in their pathetic lives." The words poured out like water through a burst dam. Harry was no longer trying to maintain any pretense of media training or diplomatic courtesy. He was a man who had finally reached his limit. And Howard Stern's studio had become ground zero for the explosion. "And you know what else is royal, Howard?" Harry continued, his voice rising to a near shout. "Royal is serving your country in combat while your family security team begs you not to go because it's too dangerous. Royal is coming home and trying to help other wounded veterans while dealing with your own trauma, only to have people like you question your service because it doesn't fit your narrative. Howard tried to interject, but Harry was beyond listening. You want to talk about my wife? Fine. Let's talk about my wife. She's a woman who gave up her entire career, her friends, her family, everything she'd worked for to try to serve a country that never wanted her from day one. She endured racist attacks from your precious British tabloids while pregnant with our son. And when she told my family she was having suicidal thoughts, they told her she couldn't get help because it would look bad for the Longcloyd Percent Institution. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Howard, master of the uncomfortable revelation, seemed momentarily stunned by the raw pain in Harry's voice. But please, Howard, tell me more about how privileged we are, Harry went on, his voice dripping with sarcasm and fury. Tell me more about how easy our lives have been while you sit in your climate-controlled studio making millions by humiliating people for entertainment. At least when I left my family, I was honest about why I did it. You've been hiding behind that microphone for decades, too cowardly to face the world without your sound effects and your enablers. Howard's face was now flushed red. In all his years of dishing it out, he rarely had to take it with such brutal efficiency. Listen here. You spoiled little? No, you'll listen, Harry exploded, slamming his hand down on Howard's desk with such force that papers scattered and Robin's coffee cup jumped. I'm done listening to you or anyone else tell me how I should feel about my life. You want to know the real truth? The truth is that I spent 30 years of my life being told when to wake up, what to wear, where to go, who to marry, and how to grieve. I was a performing monkey in a golden cage. And when I finally found the courage to break free, parasites like you want to drag me back down because my happiness threatens your narrative. Security was now moving toward the studio door. But Harry's own team seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let their client finally unleash years of suppressed fury. You think I'm playing the victim? Harry's laugh was bitter and harsh. You're damn right, I'm a victim. I'm a victim of a system that uses people up and spits them out for entertainment. I'm a victim of a media that profits off human misery. And you know what? So is everyone who listens to this garbage you call a show. The only difference is I had the resources and the platform to fight back. Howard was struggling to regain control of his own show. You're having a complete meltdown on live radio. Meltdown? Harry's voice rose to a roar. You want to see a meltdown? A meltdown is what happens when you spend your entire life being told you don't matter, that your feelings don't count, that your only value is as a tourist attraction. A meltdown is watching your brother choose the institution over his own flesh and blood. A meltdown is realizing that the people who raised you care more about their image than your mental health. The prince was now pacing back and forth in the small studio space like a caged animal. But this isn't a meltdown, Howard. This is clarity. This is me finally saying what I should have said years ago to every parasite who thinks they have the right to judge my life. You want to make money off my pain? Fine. But don't expect me to sit here quietly while you do it. Robin tried to jump in, sensing that things were spiraling completely out of control. Harry, maybe we should take a break. No breaks? Harry snapped, whirling around to face her. I'm done with breaks. I'm done with media training and damage control and trying to make everyone else comfortable with my existence. Howard wanted the real Prince Harry. Well, congratulations. This is me without the palace handlers and the carefully crafted public image. Howard made one last attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. Look, Harry, I think we've all said some things. Harry's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. Howard, you spent the last hour systematically trying to destroy everything I care about. And now you want to pretend this was just a friendly conversation. You attacked my wife, questioned my service, mocked my trauma, and dismissed my pain as attention-seeking. Did you think I was just going to sit there and take it? The studio fell into stunned silence. Harry stood in the center of the room, chest heaving, his carefully maintained public persona lying in ruins around him. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. Then Harry straightened up, smoothed down his shirt, and looked directly into the camera with a cold, calculated stare that was somehow more terrifying than his rage. "You know what the really funny thing is, Howard?" he said, his voice now eerily calm. "You think you've won something here? You think you've exposed me as some kind of fraud or hypocrite? But all you've really done is prove exactly why I left. This is what the British media did to my mother. And this is what they tried to do to my wife. The only difference is she's stronger than they are. And so am I." He walked over to where his microphone was clipped to his shirt and carefully removed it, placing it gently on Howard's desk with deliberate precision. "I came here thinking I could have an honest conversation about my work and my life," Harry said, his voice carrying across the silent studio. "Instead, I walked into an ambush designed to humiliate me for your listeners' entertainment. Well, I hope they enjoyed the show, because this is the last time I'll ever subject myself to this kind of abuse." Harry turned toward the door, his security team immediately flanking him. But before he left, he paused and looked back at Howard one final time. "You asked me earlier why I don't just cut ties with my family completely and move on with my life," he said quietly. "Well, after today, I think I finally have my answer. It's because I was still holding on to some naive hope that people could change, that institutions could evolve, that basic human decency still mattered. But sitting here listening to you tear apart everything I hold dear for the amusement of your audience, I realize that some people will never change. Some people will always choose cruelty over compassion, ratings over respect." The prince straightened his shoulders and walked toward the studio door with the bearing of a man who had finally found his backbone. "Congratulations, Howard," he called over his shoulder as he reached the exit. "You've just reminded me exactly why I made the right choice in leaving all of this behind." And with that, Prince Harry walked out of Studio 69, leaving behind a stunned Howard Stern, a room full of shocked staff members, and the smoldering remains of what would go down as one of the most explosive celebrity meltdowns in radio history. The heavy studio door closed behind him with a definitive click that seemed to echo through the sudden silence, marking the end of an interview that nobody present would ever forget.